3:47 a.m. on a Sunday. The Barakah Nuclear Power Plant, 280 kilometers west of Abu Dhabi, was running at 94% capacity. 3 operational reactors, a fourth in final testing. 2,400 megawatts flowing into the UAE grid, enough power for 500,000 homes. And then the thermal sensors tripped. Not the radiation detectors, those stayed silent. The thermal sensors. The ones that watch for unexpected heat signatures in non-reactor zones. The ones that cost the Emirates Nuclear Energy Corporation roughly $40 million to install after Fukushima. At 3:48 a.m., Sensor Array 7 Alpha, covering the spent fuel storage annex, registered a temperature spike of 187 degrees Celsius in under 4 seconds. At 3:49 a.m., the auxiliary cooling system for the annex activated automatically. Water mist, foam injection, the standard response for a fire that should not exist. At 3:52 a.m., the first human confirmation came through. A security guard on the perimeter, watching a drone, not a large one, not a military-grade Shahed, something smaller, something faster, pull a steep climb away from the plant's eastern service road. The guard later described it as about the size of a suitcase. No markings, no sound until it was already leaving. At 4:01 a.m., local fire crews arrived. By 4:30 a.m., the fire was out. By 6 a.m., the UAE government released a statement. Minor incident, no radiation release, plant operations continue normally. And then, the strangest thing happened. Nothing. No claim of responsibility, no militant group stepping forward, no Iranian announcement, no Houthi video, no ISIS statement, no Telegram channel taking credit. 24 hours, 48 hours, a week. A drone struck an active nuclear power plant. The first successful attack on an Arab nuclear facility in history, and nobody claimed it. That silence is not an absence of information. That silence is the information. And I don't think anyone covering this story has properly understood what that silence actually means. Stay with me. The UAE government's official statement, released 4 hours after the fire was extinguished, said exactly this. A small, unmanned aerial vehicle caused a localized fire in a non-nuclear ancillary structure. The fire was contained and extinguished. There is no damage to nuclear systems and no release of radioactive material. That's the sentence that stopped me. Not because it's false, it might be entirely accurate, but because of what it doesn't say. They didn't say the drone was intercepted. They didn't say they knew where it came from. They didn't say the attacker had been identified. They didn't say it wouldn't happen again. They said the fire was in a non-nuclear ancillary structure. That is nuclear industry language for, we are admitting something happened, but we are also telling you it wasn't the reactor itself, so please don't panic. Here's what almost every outlet reported in the 48 hours after the incident. Drone hits UAE nuclear plant, fire extinguished, no radiation leak, investigation ongoing. If you were consuming normal coverage, you know a drone caused a fire. You know the plant is still running. You probably moved on because no radiation meant no crisis. That's the version designed to be consumed quickly and forgotten. What that version never explained, not once in anything I read from mainstream sources, is what actually burned, and why that matters much more than the fire itself. Because the structure that caught fire was the spent fuel storage annex, and once you understand what is stored there, not in terms of radiation but in terms of strategic value, the word ancillary becomes very hard to sit with. Let me explain. The spent fuel storage annex at Barakah is not where they keep fresh fuel rods. Fresh uranium pellets are barely radioactive. You could stand next to them for hours with no ill effect. Spent fuel is different. After 18 months in a reactor core, a uranium fuel rod contains fission products, cesium-137, strontium-90, iodine-131, that are intensely radioactive. So intensely that a single spent fuel assembly, freshly removed from a reactor, produces enough radiation to deliver a lethal dose to an unprotected human in under 60 seconds. That's why spent fuel is stored underwater. Water is an excellent radiation shield. It also absorbs heat. A spent fuel pool is designed to keep the rods cool while their short-lived isotopes decay. The annex at Barakah holds 1,472 spent fuel assemblies. Each assembly weighs roughly 300 kilograms. That's 440 tons of material that, if exposed to air without cooling, would begin a self-sustaining thermal reaction within hours. Not a nuclear explosion, that is impossible with spent fuel, but a fire. A fire that would release radioactive smoke. Smoke that would travel. Smoke that would contaminate. The fire on Sunday morning was not in the pool itself. The pool is reinforced concrete, steel-lined, designed to survive a direct hit from a commercial airliner. The fire was in the auxiliary cooling system for that pool. Specifically, the backup diesel generators that power the circulation pumps if grid electricity fails. Those generators contain fuel, and diesel fuel burns. Here's the detail that almost nobody has reported correctly. The drone did not explode near the reactor. It did not explode near the spent fuel pool. It exploded approximately 12 meters from the intake vent of the backup generator building. 12 meters. The blast radius of a small explosive drone is roughly 15 meters. Whoever built that drone knew exactly where to put it. Not to breach the pool, not to melt down the reactor, to disable the backup cooling for the pool, and to do it in a way that would not trigger the plant's primary alarms, because the primary alarms are on the reactor building, not the generator annex. This was not a random attack. This was a surgical strike on the one vulnerability that nuclear plant designers have quietly worried about for 20 years, but never fully solved: the gap between backup systems. Let me give you a number that I had to check 4 times because I didn't believe it. The drone that struck Barakah cost approximately $4,000 to build. That's not a military drone. That's not a Shahed 136. That's a commercially available quadcopter frame, a 3D printed explosive charge, a civilian GPS guidance module, and a basic thermal camera for terminal targeting. Total components cost from online retailers. Assembly time under 8 hours by anyone with basic electronics experience. $4,000. Now, let me tell you what that $4,000 accomplished. It triggered an automatic safety response that shut down one of Barakah's 3 operating reactors for 48 hours. The reactor was already scheduled for refueling next month, but the shutdown was unscheduled. Unscheduled shutdowns are reportable events to the International Atomic Energy Agency. They trigger diplomatic notifications. They trigger inspections. They trigger questions that the UAE does not want to answer about how a drone got within 12 meters of a spent fuel annex. The economic impact of that 48-hour shutdown is approximately $12 million in lost electricity generation at wholesale rates. Not catastrophic. Not even noticeable on the UAE's balance sheet. But that's not the number that matters. Here's the number that matters. The cost for Barakah to harden every auxiliary structure against drone attack, to install mesh screens over all intake vents, to add radar arrays around the perimeter, to deploy counter-drone jammers to every sector, is estimated at $470 million. That's not a guess. That's from a 2022 IAEA security assessment that was never made public, but was leaked to Reuters. $470 million to defend against a $4,000 weapon. That ratio is 117,500 to 1. The attacker spent $1 for every $117,500 the defender now has to spend. And that is the entire story. Everything else, the fire, the shutdown, the diplomatic fallout, is just context around that ratio. Here's what I keep coming back to. The thing that has bothered me for the last 7 days. Nobody claimed this attack. In the history of asymmetric warfare, that is almost unheard of. Militant groups claim attacks they didn't even carry out. They claim attacks that failed. They claim attacks that killed their own people by accident. Claiming credit is the entire point of terrorism. The violence is the advertisement. So why would someone build a $4,000 drone, fly it through the air defense network of a Gulf monarchy, strike a nuclear facility, and then refuse to take credit? I've been sitting with that question for a week, and I've come to 3 possible answers. None of them are comfortable. Answer 1. The attacker failed. Not the drone. The drone succeeded perfectly, but the message failed. They wanted a fire inside the reactor building. They got a fire in the annex. They wanted a visible plume of radioactive smoke. They got a diesel fire that was extinguished in 30 minutes. And now they're embarrassed, so they're staying quiet, waiting for a second attempt that actually works. Answer 2. The attacker achieved exactly what they wanted. The fire was the distraction. The real objective was to test the response time of UAE emergency services, the activation sequence of the backup cooling systems, and the communication channels between Abu Dhabi and the IAEA. Now they have all that data, and they don't need to claim credit because the data is the prize. Answer 3. The attacker is not a militant group, it's a state. And the state does not want a war, they want a warning. They want the UAE and its allies to know that Barakah can be reached, that the spent fuel annex is vulnerable, that the next drone might carry a larger charge, and they want that message delivered without triggering the automatic military response that would come with an official claim of responsibility. I don't know which answer is correct, but I know that all three lead to the same conclusion. The attack on Barakah was not the main event, it was a rehearsal. Here's what makes this situation different from every previous drone attack on critical infrastructure. Nuclear plants are designed to survive accidents. They are not designed to survive adaptive adversaries. Let me explain the difference. When the IAEA designs security protocols for a nuclear facility, they model threats. They assume an attacker has certain capabilities. They assume an attacker will try certain approaches. They build defenses against those approaches. But those models assume the attacker is static, that they will keep trying the same method until they succeed or are caught. What happened at Barakah suggests an attacker who is adaptive, who learns, who watches how the defense responds and then adjusts. The drone did not attempt to breach the reactor containment building. The drone did not attempt to crash into the spent fuel pool. The drone struck a diesel generator intake vent, a target that was likely not on the plant's original threat model because nobody thought a drone could navigate to that exact vent. Now the plant has to update their threat model, which means adding sensors, adding barriers, adding response protocols, which costs money, which takes time, and while they're updating, the attacker is watching, learning, finding the next vulnerability that wasn't on the new model either. This is not a one-time attack, this is a campaign, and the campaign does not need to succeed in melting down a reactor. It only needs to succeed in making nuclear power in the Gulf so expensive to secure that it becomes politically unsustainable. The UAE built Barakah at a cost of $24 billion. They are planning 4 more reactors. The entire program is designed to reduce their dependence on natural gas and position them as a clean energy leader in the Arab world. A $4,000 drone just forced them to spend $470 million on additional security. And that is just the first round. How many rounds can they afford before the economics stop making sense? There's one more layer, and it's the layer that keeps nuclear security experts awake at night. The Barakah plant has a perimeter of roughly 11 kilometers. That perimeter is patrolled by ground sensors, cameras, and human guards. It is monitored by radar that detects large drones, Shahed size, military size. It is not effectively monitored against small commercial drones because small drones have a low radar cross-section and can fly at treetop height. To defend against small drones, you need either a dense network of acoustic sensors or a counter-drone jamming system that covers every approach vector. Both are expensive. Both require constant maintenance. Here's the maintenance math. A counter-drone jamming array has a mean time between failures of approximately 2,000 operational hours. That's 83 days. After 83 days, a component fails, an amplifier burns out, an antenna drifts out of alignment, a power supply drops voltage. The system needs to be taken offline for calibration and repair. During that offline window, that sector of the perimeter is blind. A determined adversary can map those maintenance windows. They can observe when the jammers are offline. They can schedule their attack for that exact window. The drone that struck Barakah was small enough that it might have been able to slip through the jammers even when they were working. But what if the jammers were not working? What if the attacker knew exactly when to fly? The UAE will not answer that question publicly. They will not admit that their counter-drone systems have gaps. They will not acknowledge that the attack succeeded in part because of predictable maintenance schedules. But the people who planned this attack, they know. And the fact that nobody claimed responsibility suggests they are saving that knowledge for a future attack. A second attack, a larger drone, a different target inside the plant. Maybe the reactor building next time. Maybe the main transformer yard. Maybe the control room. Here's the thing. The attack on Barakah is the first successful drone strike on an Arab nuclear facility. But it will not be the last. Not because the attackers are unstoppable, because the cost of stopping them is too high for any country to sustain indefinitely. The UAE can spend $470 million to harden Barakah against the $4,000 drone. But the attacker will build a $5,000 drone, then a $6,000 drone, then a drone that carries an electromagnetic pulse generator instead of an explosive, then a drone that looks like a bird, then a drone that flies underwater most of the way and only emerges at the last second. Every defense creates a new offense. Every new offense requires a more expensive defense, and the attacker always spends less than the defender. That is the trap. The UAE did not walk into this trap on Sunday morning. They walked into it the day they decided to build a nuclear plant in a neighborhood full of actors who would love to see it fail. The attacker didn't claim responsibility because they don't need to. The fire was the claim, the smoke was the signature, and the silence afterward is the most dangerous part of all. Because silence means they are watching. Silence means they are learning. Silence means they are planning the next one. And the next one, the one nobody will talk about until after it happens, might not be put out in 30 minutes.